An atheist is unclothed. Let's start with the scientific method to test their claims. Michael Birch's core thesis is, the Gospel's acts were obviously altered by charlatans, so the resurrection accounts are lies. That is a conclusion presented as a premise. The scientific method asks for a clear hypothesis, predicted evidence, and a way to falsify it. A falsifiable version of his claim would sound like this. We should see late uncontrolled legend growth that changes the central claim. Jesus rose and appeared, not just peripheral details, and we should not see early, stable summaries of resurrection belief close to the first generation. But when you examine the data, the opposite pattern shows up. 2. Information theory, stable core signal, noisy peripheral detail. In any real transmission system, you expect two things. First, redundancy that preserves the main message across channels. Second, variation in incidental details because different witnesses emphasize different facts. That is exactly what we see with the resurrection tradition. Independent streams preserve the core claim, death, burial, resurrection, appearances, while differing on secondary narration choices. A key example is Paul's early summary in 1 Corinthians 15:3-8, where he relays a received tradition. Jesus died, was buried, was raised, and appeared to named individuals and groups. That's not a later Superman Jesus bolt-on. It is an early creed-like summary embedded in a letter written within the first generation of the movement. Even critics who dispute parts of the tradition, like the 500, still treat Paul's list as evidence of early resurrection appearance claims, not a centuries-later invention. So the information picture is not late invention replaces an earlier non-miraculous story. It is early core claim persists across channels. 3. Forensic investigation. Separate textual variants from case collapse forensics distinguishes evidence that a document has variance in copying from evidence that the entire event is fabricated. Textual criticism is very open about variance. The classic example is Mark 16:9-20. Many scholars argue Mark originally ended at 16:8 and that later copyists supplied endings. Two crucial points follow. A. Birch misstates what Mark 16:1-8 says. He claims Mark originally had just an empty grave, no angels. But Mark 16:5-7 includes a young man, commonly read as an angelic messenger, who announces the resurrection and gives instructions to tell the disciples. The women said nothing line is part of Mark's dramatic ending, not proof the tomb story was invented to cover a delay. That fear and silence motif is a known Mark-an literary feature. B. Even if Mark's longer ending is later, it doesn't create resurrection belief. Removing Mark 16:9-20 does not remove the resurrection proclamation. It mainly removes one particular post-resurrection wrap-up. The resurrection claim is still present in Mark 16:6-7, and it's already present independently in Paul's early tradition in 1 Corinthians 15. So, a real forensic conclusion would be, there is at least one major textual variant, Mark's ending, and we should treat it carefully. Not. Therefore, charlatans invented the resurrection. 4. Systems theory. Independent witnesses rarely synchronize, and this lack of alignment is a characteristic feature. Birch argues, if it happened, all 5 accounts would agree. That's not how independent testimony works. In complex systems, distributed observers produce convergence on central facts, high salience events, and divergence on sequencing, emphasis, and narrative framing. Courts see this constantly. If 4 witnesses match too perfectly, collusion becomes a live hypothesis. Moderate divergence alongside core agreement often indicates independence. What do the accounts converge on? Jesus died. His followers soon believed he rose. They claimed appearances. The movement exploded in the same geographic world where the claims could be challenged. That is strong core agreement. The divergences are in narration choices, which appearance is emphasized, which city is foregrounded, and what details are included for that author's aim. Luke Acts explicitly admits selectivity. Jesus did many other things, and authors choose what to record. Systems theory calls that constrained bandwidth. 5. Paul knew nothing about X is an argument from silence. Birch lists items Paul knew nothing about. virgin birth, wise men, Herod, miracles, transfiguration, etc., and treats that as evidence they were later invented. But Paul's letters are occasional documents. He writes to fix problems, answer disputes, and teach implications. He is not writing a biography. Even so, Paul shows awareness of Jesus as a historical Jew. Born of a woman, born under the law, Galatians 4:4. Descended from David, Romans 1:3. Those lines don't prove Paul affirmed Matthew, Luke's birth narratives, but they do undercut the claim that Paul viewed Jesus as a pure myth with no earthly origin. Most importantly, Paul is explicit about resurrection appearances and names key witnesses, Cephas, Peter, James, the 12. So Paul didn't mention X cannot carry the weight Birch puts on it. 6. The Deuteronomy, Josiah, and Levites fabricated the Bible claims. Birch asserts the Levites invented Deuteronomy to enrich themselves, then calls parts of Deuteronomy satanic, and says Jeremiah proves sacrifices were a priestly con. Here's what careful analysis yields. A. The scholarship surrounding Josiah's found book and Deuteronomy is nuanced, not a straightforward fraud. Many scholars link the Book of the Law in 2 Kings 22 to some form of Deuteronomy or Deuteronomic material, and they engage in discussions about composition layers and redaction history. But moving from there is a compositional history to Levites cynically forged it to get free food is not evidence-based. That's a motive story. B. Jeremiah 7:22 is not a denial that God ever instituted sacrifice. Jeremiah 7 attacks empty ritual without obedience. That's consistent with other prophets who say God rejects sacrifices offered by corrupt people, not that sacrifice was never part of Torah faithfulness. Mainstream commentary frequently reads Jeremiah 7:22 as priority rhetoric, not merely sacrifice, but obedience, not as Moses never instituted sacrifices. C. Girls stoned for being raped misreads Deuteronomy 22:25-27, explicitly says that if a betrothed woman is raped in the field, only the man dies. That is not stone the rape victim. The debated passage is 22:28-29, unbetrothed girl. Scholars dispute whether it describes rape or seduction coercion. Even when coercion is inferred, the text imposes penalties on the man and removes his ability to divorce in a world where an abandoned non-virgin woman could be left destitute. You can argue the ancient system is harsh. You cannot accurately summarize it as God commands stoning rape victims across the board. 7. Biblical self-audit is not the same as Bible admits it was all changed into lies. Birch says the Bible admits it was altered. The Bible does record human unfaithfulness, corrupt leadership, and false prophets. That is not an admission that the resurrection is a late fabricated myth. It's closer to the opposite. The Bible routinely exposes its own people's failures rather than polishing propaganda. From a forensic angle, that unflattering candor often counts as an authenticity marker, not a tell of total fabrication. 8. A clean, evidence-based conclusion. You can grant several points Birch raises without granting his conclusion. 1. Textual transmission produced variants, and Mark's ending is a famous case. 2. The Gospels are not carbon copy transcripts, they are purposeful testimonies. 3. Paul didn't mention X proves far less than Birch claims. What does not follow is, therefore the resurrection is a lie invented by charlatans. The best evidence against that broad claim is the early and consistent resurrection tradition found in Paul, 1 Corinthians 15, and the overall pattern of main agreements with some differences, which supports independent accounts better than a made-up story. If you want, I can